Right. Is the focus okay? Is the focus okay? They all work. Good afternoon, students. This is again Professor Ashraf Narayana. Today I'll be dealing with one of the very important themes in Indian history. One of the very important phases in the Indian history, which is generally referred to as the Gandhian era. What I would do today is try to contextualize Gandhi in the historical perspective. Gandhi is one of the respected, hated, loved, adored. There are various facets and dimensions to the personality of Gandhi. And now, as students of history, how should we contextualize him for all the virtues that he had, or otherwise that people or scholars try to understand him? I would start from a quote from one of the celebrated 20th century physicists, a phenomenal personality, Einstein. Einstein, who had great respect for Gandhi, for whatever Gandhi stood for, made this remark. I quote him: "Generations to come will scarcely believe that one as this, in flesh and blood, ever walked on the surface of the earth." That is the quote. I repeat the quote: "Generations to come will scarcely believe that one as this in flesh and blood ever walked on the surface of this earth." What made him say this? Einstein, one of the phenomenal figures of science in 20th century, a man who had nothing to do with the movements, political philosophy in general, making this wonderful statement about Gandhi. I think there should be a background for that. And it only indicates the significance, the importance that Gandhi gained in the space of history. That is what I would make a meaning from this statement of Einstein. Now, getting into history, there are two ways. One, through the personalities. The other one, through the movements or the events, is the other way around. Now, Gandhi is an important, political figure, a philosophical figure, a man of deep religious convictions, who shaped the sensibilities of India between 1920s and 1940s. So this man who shaped the sensibilities of India during this time, has been understood by various people. Now, coming back to the point that when we enter into a certain phase of history through an individual, we would get to understand a certain perspective. Now, entering to the history of India or happenings in India during 1920s, 30s, and 40s through Gandhi brings us one sort of a picture of India. Suppose, in case if you take an entry to that period through Subhash Chandra Bose, you get another perspective of India. Suppose you take an entry into that period through Ambedkar, perhaps you would understand history of India of those times in a different perspective. So therefore, what is important for us to understand that how do we take an entry into certain period and through whom we take this entry. So therefore, one of the dominant figures of this period, Gandhi, certainly makes us to understand certain perspective of the history of 20th century. It is not just necessarily political history. It's cultural history, it's economic history, and history of various dimensions. So that is the way Gandhi occupies a very important place. Now, thirdly, to understand Gandhi, we need to go back to the pre-Gandhian days. Always we understand history in the sense of relativity. So Einstein's theory of relativity also applies in social sciences. It's not just confined only to physical science or the physics, for that matter. Even in social science also, this concept of theory of relativity makes a lot of meaning, and there are many scholars who have tried to understand history by this framework called theory of relativity. So if we go back to the pre-Gandhian days, so what is the picture that we get there? So generally, when we trace the political history of the modern period, we fix that history into three broad phases. That the phase of moderates, the phase of extremists, and Gandhian phase. Now, to understand Gandhian phase, to understand Gandhi, we need to understand the pre-Gandhian phases, the phase of moderates and the phase of extremists. Now, what did the moderates represent? The moderates were the first critique of the British colonial policies. Dadabhai Naoroji, the last class I mentioned his name, that when he wrote Poverty and Un-British Rule in India, he made a very scathing critique of the colonial policies of the British in Indian situation. And by following a deductive method in statistical terms, he tried to show how the British were plundering our economic wealth. So Dadabhai Naoroji was one of the moderates. W.C. Banerjee was another important moderate. So that way there were many other stalwarts who constituted the group of these moderates. The moderates followed primarily the method of political mendicancy. It's been called as the political mendicancy. What is this political mendicancy? Political mendicancy is nothing but submitting the representations and awaiting for the results. Submitting the representations, awaiting for the results. So that way, a policy of persuasion, a policy of convincing, a policy of reasoning out, on their own terms, was something that was very specific to the moderate period. Surendranath Banerjee or W.C. Banerjee or Gokhale, for example, or Dadabhai Naoroji, many of these stalwarts of the moderate period, they tried this method of submitting petitions and awaiting for the results. And interestingly, it was this class of the moderates who were able to decode how the British were plundering Indian economy and how they robbed the Indian economic strength by draining away everything from this soil. But that method of submitting the petitions were not liked by the next phase of stalwarts. They were called as extremists. Lal Bal Pal, for example, Bipin Chandra Pal, Lala Lajpat Rai, and Lokmanya Tilak. These triumvirate, and there were many others who belonged to this school. They did not have a respect for this kind of a method being followed by the moderates. So they tried to be more aggressive in their posture. They tried to employ a different set of mode of protest, and therefore they brought in a great sense of aggressiveness. So aggressiveness became a hallmark of this group of political leaders of India. But there is also a certain deviation within this extremists. They were called aggressive, nationalists or revolutionaries. They were called as revolutionaries. These revolutionaries, they basically believe in the violent methods. They did not believe in the appealing method. They did not just believe that, scaring the British was, was anything to do, but they wanted to show that they could debase, through violent methods, the British establishment in India. So this aggressive nationalists, were a very important phase as far as the Indian, history is concerned, particularly of 1890s and the first decade of the 20th century. So therefore, when you compare the methodology of both moderates and the extremists and the revolutionaries, you would understand, when we take a discussion on Gandhi, how Gandhi totally differed from, these schools of, thought. In fact, primarily, Gandhi himself said he was dealing with the school of violence. So Gandhi was trying to deal with this school of violence. He wanted to, convince them that violent method was not the method for attaining Swaraj or the freedom of this country. So that way, Gandhi assumes greater significance for, us. So now, to understand Gandhi, we need to understand what kind of influences that Gandhi, was in for to, frame the kind of philosophy that he finally, envisaged. So there were very, enduring experience. Enduring influences on the Gandhian, thinking, and these, influences were too deep on Gandhi. And when we understand these, influences, perhaps we would be able to understand and appreciate why Gandhi followed certain method that he followed. So one of the very primary influences on Gandhi was none other than his mother, only. His mother made a very deep impact on the psyche of Gandhi. So if Gandhi remained basically religious, it was the deep influence of his mother on young Gandhi. His mother was a very pious lady, highly religious lady, and who would follow a certain religious, ceremonies regularly. So these, activities of mother and tuning of the son made a everlasting influence on Gandhi. So therefore, one of the influences to understand Gandhi is to understand how his mother made a very deep impact on, Gandhi. Secondly, the concept ahimsa.